Welcome to John Teaches Sean About His Brain, the podcast where I, Sean, embark on a journey to understand what's happening in my own head. Spoiler alert, I have no clue, but that's precisely why we're here. In each episode, I explore questions about the brain that I believe will resonate with all of us. Like, why can't I turn my brain off at 3 a.m.? Why my memory only works when it feels like it? And why my brain seems to betray me when I need it most. Listen, I'm not a scientist. I'm no expert. I'm just a guy looking to unravel the mysteries of my own mind. Fortunately, I happen to know a cognitive neuroscientist who is an expert in the brain, and I get to ask him all the questions I want. So, if you're curious, confused, or simply along for the ride, welcome. And hey, if you like what you hear, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe to the podcast, or whatever it is you do wherever you listen to podcasts. I don't know how the algorithms work. I just know that your support keeps this journey moving forward. And together, we might just discover something remarkable. This is John Teaches Sean About His Brain. Let's get started.
Hi, John. It's good to see you.
Hey, Sean. Good seeing you.
Do you have anything on your mind this week?
I do have something on my mind. It's something I read on the BBC a few days ago. But they're running a series where they're using AI to try to gain insight into how the human brain works, which is odd because AI doesn't really work anything like the brain. But I think they're making the point they're not trying to understand the brain as a whole. They want to use AI to try to solve some specific problems to see if that will give insight into how the brain solves specific problems. So not to have a full understanding of the brain, but just some of the issues. So anyway, that was the kind of the background to it. So, and it's a series of episodes, and that they've written, or it might even be visual. They might have media news pieces on it as well. I don't know, but I read it, and they were using the Rorschach test. Have you heard of that? The ink blot test?
I have, yeah.
Okay. So just to quickly background on it was named after some guy named Rorschach several decades ago. He created these ink blots on a piece of paper, where you put ink on a piece of paper, and then you fold the paper, and then you open it, and it's like symmetrical shapes, but they're specifically meant to have no meaning to them. And then, and people have probably seen them because they're really, they're in popular culture. Like the first one looks kind of like a butterfly or a moth, if you've seen, or some people see it as a skull, or, it's just different ways to view it. So he wanted to use it to see if he could identify disordered thinking, like in schizophrenia. But then some of the clinical psychologists following like Freud and people like that, started using it loosely as a personality test, which is so ineffective. You might as well ask somebody what they think about broccoli or what their favorite color is to learn about their personality, rather than these ink blot tests, because it doesn't tell anything about personality.
Okay. So, but the idea is, I know you're saying it doesn't, but the idea is, based on what my response is, what I see, or what I say I see, that would give them insight into what my personality is.
That's the way it was being used for a while. Yes. So
Okay.
If you see the skull, maybe you have a dark personality, or you're seeing things, or maybe something happened to you in your childhood. So I need to explore that, which is not how it's used today, at least not in most industrialized countries.
I thought that was I'm glad that you're talking about this, because I said in the beginning, oh yeah, I know about that test, but I thought that that's what it was used for, is, and there's a joke it's not appropriate to tell here about the Rorschach test, but what somebody sees can give you some insight into their personality or some trauma, and you're saying that's not accurate.
And most psychologists today will still, some psychologists, some clinical psychologists still use it, but not as a personality test.
Okay.
It's more of an icebreaker, or to get people to open up and to start conversations, because you can start a conversation around it. Like, what do you see in this? And you tell what you see, and they say, why do you think you see that? So you can start conversations to let them, but it's not a test where if you say that you see this, it means your personality is like this. It's not really used like that anymore.
Oh,
It was at one point.
Okay.
But again, the original purpose was to try to find disordered thinking and some things like that. I don't know how effective it was for that either, but it's something that we're all kind of familiar with. So so they wanted to show 5 of the standard cards, Rorschach cards, to AI, upload them to AI, and have AI and say what AI sees. I don't think that there's really much value to me, in my mind, of using the ink blot test to compare AI to the human brain. And partly because we've talked about this before, but I don't think it hurts to talk about it again. Vision is an active process. It's not passive. When you see something, that image was built from the ground up. So when physical properties from the environment around us, when that information enters our eye, for vision, light has to strike an object and then bounce off that to hit our eye. So that's those wavelengths of light that enter our eye provide contours and edges and eventually color and motion and things like that. And those are used to start to build that image, but so are your past memories, your knowledge. Those add bits and pieces to the image as well, as does your expectations, your understanding of the contextual information around it. There's so much that goes into vision. It's an active process. You don't just sit back and just see things. It's very active. Your brain is building it based on a lot of different things. So
I'm sorry,
doing
and you
something.
said also in a previous episode, I don't remember hearing you say it just now, but it also is anticipate, or you remember you were saying like a ball is coming at you?
Yes, it has to predict into the future what's going to happen.
Predict into the future.
It's a fortune teller in that sense.
Of sorts, yeah.
So that's not really how AI works. And nobody is really claiming that that's how AI works. But anyway, setting that aside, I think their point was just to say, if AI sees something in this image and tells us why it sees it, maybe we can learn about why humans see that. But they selected an untrained version of ChatGPT, so closed source, one that hadn't gathered a lot of information from the internet and interwebs. They loaded these images into it, and they tried to keep it as uninformed as possible, but it immediately recognized the images as part of the Rorschach test. So there was enough information when it was built, even though it was untrained. It still had some information. I guess you can't get it completely away from the internet and from base knowledge. So it recognized the images as part of that and explained that what the images were and how they're commonly used. So then they started pressing it to interpret the images, and it would say, well, here's how some humans see it, and would tell like the butterfly and the moth and things like that. So they kept pushing it further and further. And finally it gave kind of a simple, straightforward answer like, well, this image could be seen as a butterfly or moth, with the middle parts that are connected could be perceived as a body, and the other parts on the outside could look like wings and things like that. So they concluded that AI's response to the Rorschach test doesn't really provide much insight into how vision works or into the human brain.
Into the brain, yeah.
But which was my take at first. But then after I read it, I was like, wait, I disagree. I think it's an amazing demonstration of how complex our brain and human vision is. I mean, it's not, simple enough that you can compare it with something like AI. It shows that our visual system isn't like a camcorder that just records things and then can pull it up like AI does with some facts around it and remember it. But instead, vision's an active process that leads us to experiences that are unique to each of us. So they're not vastly different, but they're definitely unique anyway. Like, we don't have vastly different experiences of the world. We gave the example. Well, there's been different examples that we've given in previous podcasts where two people are sitting side by side and they're have the same physical access to the same physical energy, but they process it differently, not vastly differently, but
Right.
it's unique. So it reminds me of one of my favorite books about visual cognition. It's called, and I pulled it out so I wouldn't get the title messed up. The Seeing Eye. Sorry, I just messed it up already. It's called The Thinking Eye, The Seeing Brain by James Innes. I'll kind of hold it up so you can see it.
There we
But
go.
I love this book because it's kind of a twist on words to make you stop and think, wait, it's usually a seeing eye and a thinking brain. No, it's the thinking eye and the seeing brain, just to talk about how active and engaged our brain is in vision itself, in seeing things. So anyway, sometimes common sense is wrong. When we say the eyes just see,
Right.
but it's not completely wrong. That title isn't completely wrong because we think with it's not completely against common sense. We think with our brain too, but we also see with our brain. So I think you get the point on that. So I just thought that was an interesting thing that they were trying, and led me through a lot of different thoughts about it.
It's interesting because it brings us back to this point that I've just taken from these conversations with you. You used a really good word there for me, as unique. Is the idea that the two of us can be sitting side by side, looking at the same thing, hearing, again, you said, taking in the raw data from around us the same, but processing it a little bit differently. So when we talk about how, I see the world, and again, I don't mean that literally, but just now it's really about how my brain is interpreting the information that it's being sent. And we have to remember that it's a little bit different than everybody else. And,
that's exactly
going,
right.
Going back into prior episodes and talking about, if we understand that we all see the world a little bit differently, if you understand that and accept that as a working theory, then you have to be a little bit more empathetic to the way that other people see the world. It's just because you see it that way doesn't mean that everybody sees it that way.
Exactly.
And it's interesting. It's a point that keeps being made that we're unique. And
Yeah, and
AI,
I hope that gets across. Right.
I
But I
mean,
hope that point really gets across as we continue this podcast over and over.
Yeah, there's two things that we're 12-ish episodes into this podcast now, and the two things that are and both of them, until I just pointed them out, for me are implicit. You have this way of trying to explain how most of the things that we do are positive, that our brain does, not we do, but that our brain does is positive. It's good. And then the other thing is that it's unique. And those are the two messages that I feel are weaved in. I don't even know if you do. I don't think you're doing it intentionally. I think that's just you, as you have this information and that I don't think a lot of people have, and you're trying to share these two things. And again, that's putting words in your mouth and thoughts in your head. That's what I'm getting from our conversations. So
No, good.
that's
I'm
why we're
glad
going
you
to keep
are.
doing it.
Yeah, I'm glad you are, because when you first hear about something, it's you have a tendency to think about it. It's new and it's novel, so you have a tendency to think about it like, oh, this is probably bad.
Yeah.
And so when you hear about something new, you think about all the ways it could go wrong and all the bad things it could do. But as you learn more about things, you start going, oh wait, there's actually a lot more good than there is bad. And that's the way the brain is talking about different things. It's if it was mostly bad, it probably wouldn't still be a part of how our brain functions by now.
Oh, that's an interesting point too. See, it's bringing it back to the good. Good. Well, since we're kind of rolling on this, I how do I coalesce? How do I bring this thought together? But we've talked about the back channel and how powerful it is, its processing power, and the on channel, a little more limited in ability. But, we think the on channel is logical and reasoning and can make these deductions, how it works. And then you've talked about the on channel and how it pushes urges and drives, or it has drives, it pushes behavior a lot of times. So it got me thinking about the role that both of those systems play, if any, in decision making, right? So when you talk about and I think I've said privately, I don't know, I think I've said it on this podcast several times, but my back channel is a jerk. Left unchecked, I say and do things that I regret, right? So, but my point to that is if the back channel is left without being redirected or stopped, it does cause us it drives behaviors. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So now when I bring in this term decision making, which I want to talk about that term first, because I think that we throw that term around a lot just as people, and I've heard decision making process, all this, and it's always this phrase decision making. And so, we just start there. And so 2 questions. Number 1, can you give your kind of working definition of decision making? And question 2, can you briefly talk about the role of one or both of the systems in your definition of decision making?
Sure. So there's so many different levels to the types of decisions we make. And so one of the levels can be the really large decisions in life, like where we're going to go to college, who we're going to marry, where we're going to live, what our career is going to be. Those can be really big decisions. And those usually, there's quite a bit of time. We spend quite a bit of time thinking through those, which is a good thing to think through those. Right. And have you ever made a list of the pros and cons of something and put those out?
Yeah.
What's fascinating is that technique. You think things like that you think have been around forever. Actually, Ben Franklin came up with the idea of how to do that, to try to make a decision. And he wrote a letter to a friend of his and said, I've found as when I'm trying to make these big decisions, he said, I refer to them as moral algebra, because with algebra, you can have 2 equations on each side of the equal sign. And as you take from one, it takes from the other, and you kind of balance out the equation that way. So he called it moral algebra. And he said, I find it very helpful to take a piece of paper and to write, to draw a line across the top, and on the left side of the line, write, I don't think he used pros and cons. I can't remember the word he used, but something like pros, and on the right side, put cons, and then draw a line to divide them down the entire middle of the page. So you have 2 columns. I mean, he was explaining everything about how to make a pros and cons list. And then you write on one side what the pros are, and then the cons on the other side. And then after you have them all written out, you look on the pros side and find one of the pros and see what it's morally equal to on the con side. And when you find that moral balance, you strike both of those out. And then you go to the next one and find the moral balance and strike both of those out. And then what you're left with eventually, and maybe for one pro, it balances 2 cons, or for one con, it balances 2 pros. So you figure out how to balance each item. And then at the end, you're left with one side having more value than the other. And that's how you make your decision. So that's a way to make really big decisions, like where you're going to go to college, something like that, make a pros and cons list. But we make very few of those types of decisions in our life. Most of the decisions we make have less impact. And it's like, where are we going to take a vacation this year? Or, things like that aren't as big, but you can still write pros and cons lists for that. I'm not saying you can't, but the ramifications aren't as big. And then it, gets down to even another tier to say, where do you want to have lunch, or what do you want to eat tonight for dinner? Those types of decisions. And those seem like the, excuse me, those seem like the everyday decisions that are, you make 10 of those a day and you feel like that's it. But that's not it. We're actually making probably thousands of smaller decisions every day that are just related to if you know, pick up a book, or if you go click on a website or not, or if you decide to look for something. All these things are happening, and you're just doing stuff all day long based on these urges and impulses. A lot of times they're coming from the back channel, or just feelings that you have, emotions, things like that will initiate decisions that we don't even realize they're decisions, and we don't really think about them as decisions, but you have choices, so to speak, and you're making one or another. So then it comes down to looking at decisions also maybe as solving problems too, kind of going hand in hand. So to solve a problem, there's a couple of ways to do that. One is if you have an algorithm, then you know that if that algorithm will always take you to a specific answer. It's like a recipe is an algorithm. If you put in 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of sugar and whatever else you put in, you're always going to get a certain type of cake or a certain type of cookie. And so that's an algorithm. So you know what the steps are and you follow those. But in our daily life, those are really rare. They happen, but they're rare. Most of our decisions and solving problems are done with based on a rule of thumb or our best guess. They're referred to as heuristics. So we have heuristics that operate in the back channel that really, in a sense, make these small decisions for us, make them all day long. And we're not even consciously aware that the decisions are being made, and they're not being made like just willy-nilly. There's a system to them, but it's not an algorithmic system. It's more of a rule of thumb, best guess system.
So 2 things. So now your answer to my first question leads to more questions, but let's just call them decisions for right now, just to keep this simple, but we're making thousands of them a day, and we're not aware of most of them. So that is happening in the back channel.
Yes.
Correct. So again, I like what you started with, because it really did reframe this. If I'm going to sit down and make a pros and cons list, that's on channel thinking. I'm making the Ben Franklin list. I'm using my cognitive effort to think about virtue and vice, or whatever you want to call it, and making these lists. But, if I did that for every decision, I'd be sitting here probably without a shirt on, or no, even go further. I mean, I made a decision on what shirt to put on, whether I know it or not, whether it was because it was at the top of the pile, or I like the color, or whatever. So all of those decisions are made in the back channel. That's my first question. That's accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So in order to operate in the back channel, it's happening without us being conscious of it. It's in the non-conscious. And also we have now you said heuristics, so I'm going to need you gave an example, but can you kind of give me the definition of what a heuristic is?
Yeah, it's really, rule of thumb is the best definition for it. It's non-algorithmic. It's just a rule of thumb. It's some system like trial and error would be a heuristic.
Okay.
Because if you think about almost any decision, even these small ones we're talking about, have so many options with so many potential outcomes. If your brain were was like a computer that's going to try to run through every option, every potential outcome, it would take quite a bit of time, and you would have to stop. Basically, it would halt and stop everything you're doing every little bit to try to look at all the different possibilities and outcomes. And even then, once you get several layers deep, it's hard to predict what all's going to happen. So instead of doing all that, there's just a snap decision of do this because of a heuristic, this rule of thumb I have that generally works. And it's been, these come about through experience. So my experience has said this generally works. So rather than spend all the time and resources that I have, I'm just going to make this quick decision, I'm going to use this heuristic for this quick decision.
Okay. And so I'm assuming then there are a lot of these heuristics.
Oh yeah, I would say there's probably dozens of them. And again, so let me make this point. Heuristic is a term that scientists came up with, and the heuristics that have been discovered and discussed are just labels. And they're labels to try to help us understand how the brain works. It doesn't mean there's anything special about them other than it's a label trying to describe what the brain is doing. It's kind of like when we label things, we understand it better. Like maybe if you have a soda and it's like a cola, a dark soda, and you think of ways you can describe it. You can describe it as fizzy, sugary, strong, or maybe whatever. And so each of those are features of one thing. But then you might even have something that combines the features, like you might say, it burns your throat, so it's burning. But that might be a combination of the strong taste and the fizziness, and if it's cold or something, when we're talking about heuristics, they overlap. Sometimes it might take two heuristics to describe one, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just people have thought about, here's what seems to happen to me. It seems to happen to a lot of other people too, how our brains work. So let's study it. And then we have to come up with a label to describe it. So if you, every time you crack your knuckles, you sneeze, you might think, okay, I know I didn't think these through very well. But let's just say every time you crack your knuckles, you sneeze. You might think, is that just a Sean thing, or do other people do that? So you ask 100 people, and let's say 86 of them say, oh yeah, when I crack my knuckles, I sneeze too. And you go, oh, this must be a thing. But you don't label it at that point, the Sean effect, until you have to do some experimentation around it. So now you invite just randomly 100 people into your lab. And now your assumption is 86 of them are going to sneeze when they crack their knuckles. So then you put them through a series of tests in a controlled environment where you crack one knuckle at a time and see how many times they sneeze. And you do that for 100 people. Then you see if it really is something common or not. And that's kind of what has happened with these heuristics. They've thought about some things. They've brought people in. They've conducted multiple experiments around them and said, yes, this is something that nearly everybody experiences. So now we're going to say that this, then you get to name it. So now it's the Sean heuristic or the Sean effect. And then you describe it, and that becomes a heuristic. And it's just describing something that happens to you, but happens to a lot of people. So you put a label on it, so people now know what you're talking about.
Okay. So, you said there were a whole bunch of heuristics. Let's just focus on a couple.
Okay.
So do you have one that we can highlight?
Yeah, one we've talked about some of these already. We just haven't labeled them.
Okay.
So I mean, in previous episodes,
Right. Yeah.
So one of them is the representativeness heuristic, and that means you're judging something based on how well it matches up to a stereotype you already have, or a pattern that you already have. So I think we discussed it in the past as like a librarian.
Yep. That's where my head was going. The librarian.
Yeah.
And so that is what we were talking about was a stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is now, if there's a decision that matches that stereotype, I'm more likely to go that direction.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
So
like, we use the librarian. So you would assume that if you said, that this person is shy, they wear glasses, they wear sweaters, they like to read, they're really quiet, are they more likely to be a librarian or a salesperson?
Right. They're a
And so you're
librarian.
going, oh, librarian. But
Yep.
they're probably not. The odds are much, much greater that they're a salesperson. But those characteristics fit a stereotype of a librarian. So then your brain automatically just jumps there. Or you might be surprised if you see somebody that comes into a building and they have on just a pair of khaki pants or something with a sweater, and their hair is really long and kind of uncombed, and they have a beard, and they walk in and introduce themselves as a lawyer. They're a lawyer that's going to help you with your case. You're like, whoa. So now you're like, this doesn't fit the prototype. So now you're probably, because of the representativeness heuristic, you're thinking they're probably not they're probably inept and not a good attorney, just because your stereotypes around somebody. You expect attorney to be, groomed, well cut, really nice suit, walking in with a briefcase. And when they don't, you're like, whoa. And it doesn't mean they're not a good attorney, but that's
right. So this is okay. So this is a concrete example for me of this heuristic that you're describing. Is I've just been arrested. I'm sitting in a cell. I'm waiting for my lawyer, who's been assigned to me. I've never met him. And this person walks in the way you described them, not in a suit. They're wearing khakis and sandals, Birkenstocks, right? And a sweater and long hair, and they have a backpack. Without me being able to explain why, I'm more than likely going to say, I don't want this person as my attorney.
Yeah, that's right.
And they haven't even said a word to me. But they could be a really good attorney. They could be a great attorney. But I have something in my brain that they don't fit my stereotype for what an attorney is. So I am more inclined to decide to go a different direction.
Yeah.
And go with a person in a suit who carries a briefcase who might be horrible.
Yeah. And if they look the first way you described them, with khakis and Birkenstocks and all of that, if they're successful at all, that means they're probably a really good attorney, because they've overcome all the stereotypes along the way to get cases and to argue in front of judges and juries. And so they're probably really good at what they do.
And I want to stick on heuristics because I'm really into this right now. But to circle back, when I say I don't want this person as my attorney, my on channel might come up with some reason that is not what we're discussing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh boy. Oh
yeah. Then your on channel comes up with a reason.
Yeah.
Because you don't know why. You just have this feeling this isn't a good attorney. And if somebody says, why do you say that? You have to come up with an answer, and you may not understand why. Your back channel is saying it doesn't match the pattern of what we think a good attorney should look and act like. But that's especially if you're not really in tune with heuristics and your back channel and all of that, then you're likely to come up with something that was said or done that is unrelated to it.
Say if you haven't listened to this podcast, you might not understand why you feel that way.
Exactly.
Sorry, shameless plug. But so that is representativeness.
Yeah, and another part of this, you've heard of gambler's fallacy? Or maybe
I'm
you
not
haven't.
sure. Man.
Okay, so that's a part of the representative heuristic as well. And that's the fallacy to think, if you're flipping a coin, what are the odds it's going to land on heads if you flip a coin?
It's 50-50.
50-50.
Yeah.
Let's say you flipped a coin, you're going to flip it 10 times, and the first 9 times it's come up heads. What's the likelihood or the probability it's going to come up tails on the 10th time?
Very low. It's very low.
That's gambler's fallacy. Because each flip...
I am a gambler, by the way, so I was afraid of this. I knew this was going to happen to me.
Each time you flip it, the 50-50 probability starts over.
Right.
So the coin doesn't keep track of what it's been doing. But it happens because we expect random sequences to be representative of randomness. And even though a coin's independent and it restarts at its 50-50 odds each time, we expect it to be representative of randomness. And something's not random if it happens the same way 9 times in a row. So our minds want to balance that out and say, so the next 4 or 5 times it's got to be tails to balance that out. And so then you start chasing chance and get deeper and deeper and further and further. That's the representativeness heuristic as well.
You're describing me in a casino right now, by the way, so it's a little too close to home. Okay, that makes sense to me, though. Representative, and I really like the way that that you tied it into stereotypes, because we talked about stereotypes.
And it's impossible to separate people from stereotypes. It happens so automatically and so quickly, but we have to try, and we have to be aware of it. So we can't really separate them initially, but we can stop and think through it and, come up with a better thought towards that. But
stereotyping things is okay, but not people.
Right.
But now we're talking about, okay, I'm doubling down because I've stereotyped people. There was a gambling phrase too, but I've stereotyped people, and now I am making decisions about those people, and I'm not even fully aware of that if I don't understand what you're discussing right now. Yep. And I might further not understand it because my brain makes up reasons that seem plausible. So I'm in this loop of just stereotyping people, making decisions about them, and explaining it away. And wow.
Well, and then something that comes with that is once you stereotype somebody, then anything they do can be interpreted as fitting back into your stereotype and confirming what you thought about them. And that's really another heuristic called the confirmation bias.
I've heard of this. I've heard that term before, but explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, the confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, recall information in a way that confirms what we already suspect or believe or have values around. So we look for evidence to say, see, I knew it. So if you have a stereotype of somebody as being like obnoxious, and then they walk up and they stub their toe on a table, you're like, see, I knew it. And now they're even more ingrained in as being this obnoxious person.
But who wouldn't make a loud noise if they stubbed their toe?
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is like a lot of people would, but because that fits my stereotype, then that solidifies, see, I was right.
Yeah, and it goes even beyond that. The confirmation bias goes even a little bit further than that. We seek out evidence to support what we already think. It's not all just passive. We'll seek it out to make the point. And I don't, many times in this podcast, we bring it back to our current world and current state it's in, but that's especially true in our political climate today. People aren't as concerned about facts around things as they are about the narrative around that thing, because the narratives can support our point of view. And so we'll seek out, if there's an issue that's come up or something's happened where there's been an event, people jump immediately to the narrative that fits and confirms what they already think and believe. It's really difficult to consider it as something new to maybe add to information, like to add to and change a schema a little bit. Instead, it's we jump to and actively seek out the narrative that supports what we already believe.
Okay.
And then, when we become really entrenched in our viewpoint, logic and reason is abandoned. I mean, it's out the window. So what research has shown is that if somebody is really entrenched in a viewpoint, maybe it's a conspiracy theory or something like that. Okay. If they're really bought in and entrenched in that, then it's more effective. If you're wanting to talk to them about that and you try to throw facts at them and say, well, that can't be true because look at this fact and look at this fact and look at this fact, that's not very effective at all, because they can, even if they don't do it to you, in their minds, they spin that fact to confirm what they already believe. So it's almost more effective because they're coming at it from an emotional point of view. So logic and reason don't hold as much weight now as emotions do around this thing I'm entrenched in. So our emotions become bigger than and almost impervious to facts and reason and logic. So the only type of argument we really understand then is another emotional one. So it's almost better to kind of, to argue towards their emotions rather than towards facts.
But that's still confirmation bias.
Yeah, because any fact you give them, again, they'll spin it to confirm what they already believe. Yeah, like, well, of course it's that. The fact that we have pictures of the moon. Well, of course you do, because those pictures were taken in Wyoming. Like, oh, well, of course you do, because the government has the equipment to make it look like this or that. Right. So everything gets spun to confirm the original belief rather than to think, what are these facts really?
Right. Oh, wow.
Well, and, I've given the example too. I just thought of another one I think I gave this example. If I arrive at a party late and I say, man, the traffic's terrible.
Yes.
Yeah. And then not using that same reason for the person that arrives right behind me, because they're maybe from a minority group or they're from a group different from mine. So I go, yeah, their kind's always late. And my back channel says that even if I don't want to think that way, that's just what it's always trying to confirm what stereotypes we already have, what we already believe. So you have to be kind of vigilant to say, no, that's an individual person. And if traffic was difficult for me to work through, it was difficult for them to work through. Right. And kind of fight that
stereotyping
your tendency. Yeah.
Stereotyping people.
Yep.
But then again, we've added another layer. I know I've already said it twice, but now we're talking about how that stereotype, we've allowed ourselves to stereotype people. And now because of this particular heuristic confirmation bias, now we're actually getting more deeply entrenched in that stereotype because I can find all the reasons why my stereotype was right about this. So at least knowing that exists in my back channel, this heuristic. So now I have to be doubly vigilant. What this podcast is doing is making me work harder than I want to in life. That's what it's really doing. I want to be a good person and know about my brain, but man, it's a lot of work. So we've only done 2, right? So we have representativeness, confirmation bias. Give me another one.
So like, since we're kind of talking about the emotional side versus the logical and reasonable side, there's the affect heuristic, which says that our current emotions, how we're feeling right now, influence our decisions that we're going to make. So if you're feeling really positive about life right now because something good has happened, then you're going to think about things more positively, or you're going to think about them more negatively if you are in a bad mood and feeling negative. And yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry, but I think we've talked about this before. We were talking about, I've watched a movie and thought it was horrible, and then watched it another time and thought, what was I thinking? This is great. You were saying how you feel in the moment or what's going on in your life in the moment. That's this heuristic, right?
That's exactly right. I forgot about that. Yeah, no, that's it.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but that jumped out at me as you have already described it, but we didn't give it the name.
Right. No, that's a great tie-in.
Affect heuristic.
Yeah, or affect.
Affect.
It's AFF.
So I have to say,
ECT.
I know, because I still don't know the difference between effect and affect. So I say them that way because I try to remember that they're different.
Yeah, so a person's affect is their emotional expression. So if they have no affect, that means they're just like poker face.
Okay.
Or if they're affective, means they're very gregarious, emotional,
outgoing.
Or they're in the moment. Their facial expressions are, they're showing their emotions. But this heuristic is also important when we talk about risk and when we're making decisions on an activity, let's say, based on risk. So if you're going to skydive versus going skiing versus what's another, playing golf, let's say,
Okay.
people will say, well, skydiving's the most dangerous. I think most people would say, I think everybody basically would say out of
Would
those
say
three,
that.
that's the most
Yes.
dangerous. But some people would argue, well, skydiving is not that much more dangerous than skiing. You can hit a tree and, things can happen. So there's not that much of a difference. And that would be somebody who is a skydiver or who has done that and has a really positive outlook and view. So they've done it, and the adrenaline rush it gives you and the excitement and the thrill, all of that is so positive that we tend to downplay the risk of it because of how positive it is. Or if somebody doesn't like golf, but they really like skiing, they might feel like and say to you, well, golf seems more dangerous. If that golf ball hits you in the head, I mean, you're done. And you've got people that aren't very good golfers from everywhere. Like when I'm skiing and there's trees there, they don't move. So I can ski around them, but golf balls move, and somebody else hits an errant golf ball and it pops you in the head, and that could be it type of thing. But then a golfer would say, no, it's way more dangerous to go skiing. So you judge risk based on how positive or negative you feel about the activity, for example.
And again, that's happening in the back channel.
Yeah, you're yeah.
We're
And
not.
so sometimes you're aware that in this argument, yeah, skiing might be as dangerous as golf or more dangerous, but I don't want to play golf. So I'm trying to convince my friend to ski instead of playing golf. So you make the arguments, but they have to start from a point of you thinking it's a really low risk anyway. So
Right.
sometimes you might understand I'm stretching it a little bit to try to get what I want. But most of the time, it's how you really feel about the risk behind it. And if you thought skiing was really risky and was really dangerous, you might not do it.
Yeah.
And so then that's like around activities, but it also is around decisions we make in daily life. So let's say that you're looking for a job and you want to get a job in management at some level. And so you think, man, if any job opportunity comes up, and you've already put an application in a couple places, but you've asked friends around, hey, if you know of anybody who's looking for, where a position comes open, I want to apply because I'm really looking for this job. So you stop by your parents' house one day and your dad says, hey, can you help me with the project in the garage? So you go in the garage and you're trying to help your dad around, and you're all thumbs basically, and you're messing some things up. And finally your dad says, hey, I think I have it from here. Why don't you go see what your mom's doing? And you're like, I mean, you just got rejected by your dad. So you go, yeah, okay, whatever. So you walk in, you're feeling really bad about that. And you're feeling negative about yourself. Like, I can't do anything right. And, that negative self-talk comes in.
Yep.
Like, I'm such a screw up. My dad's still getting after me. And your friend sends you your phone beeps and it's a text, and your friend says, hey, I have a friend at this company that said they're hiring in a management position. You should apply. And your first thought is, I don't have a shot at a job like that. I'm too big of a screw up. I mean, because your ability to try to help your dad with a craft project in the garage failed, but that has nothing to do with your management skills, but your affect, your feeling at the moment, being down on yourself, affects that to where you go, I'm not going to apply for that job. I don't have a shot at that, which maybe you did have a shot at that.
Yeah.
So don't make major decisions when your emotions are heightened in either direction, like really positive or really negative.
I've heard that before. Don't make decisions when you're angry or happy, right? Or something like that. But I think the way you put it is way better. Is don't make major decisions when you have high emotions.
Heightened emotions, yeah.
Good
high
or
emotions.
bad.
Yeah.
Good or bad. That's good advice.
You need emotions in decision making. If you take emotions completely out of decision making, people think we should be like Spock and just be completely logical. That was a Star Trek reference, if you didn't know.
Yeah.
But we should just be perfectly logical, and we'd make the best decisions. And people with no emotions, and usually because of brain damage or a tumor or something that affects, or they're Vulcan. they make terrible decisions. We need emotions to help, because emotions are what give us the understanding of what it might feel like if our decision is right or wrong. And so that kind of the empathetic feeling too,
Mm-hmm.
because if you make a wrong decision, even if somebody with limited emotions, let's say, where their emotional system isn't working as it normally did, it's atypical, they'll say, well, I realized, I'm going to, throw something way out there, but I could grab this and just walk out of the store with it. And I know that I could get caught, but I don't know if that's really bad to get caught. I don't know if it's bad to go to jail. So there's no emotional tie. So then you tend to make really bad decisions. And people with those issues usually very quickly lose their job, lose their family splits, it
Yeah.
leaves them, and they're on their own. It's really sad when you don't
Yeah.
have emotions. So you need emotions to make decisions, but they just shouldn't be in an extreme high or low. Wait till they're balanced back out before you make your decisions.
Got it. I like that. So there's one I really am interested in that I've heard before. I've heard it referred to two ways, which I'm going to address, but the frequency illusion, is that right?
Mm-hmm. There's a frequency
illusion?
illusion.
Okay.
It's also called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon.
Yeah, I don't know that we should be referring to things after a terrorist group. The Red Faction Army is. Bader-Meinhof is.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's the Red Faction Army. They did all kinds of heinous stuff. Why are we naming it after a terrorist group?
Let's call it the frequency illusion.
Frequency illusion. Got it. Okay, frequency illusion. But what is that referring to?
That's the kind of the false impression that something happens more often than it really does. Something's happening a lot when it's not really happening a lot. And I think I brought this up also before. And this is what I'm saying. We've talked about a lot of these in earlier podcasts without labeling them. But when I got my first vehicle, it was a Jeep. And I won't go through the whole story, but once I had a Jeep, I started noticing Jeeps everywhere. It's like, did everybody go out and buy a Jeep when I did? Because I hadn't noticed them before. And that's the frequency illusion. It seems like now there are a lot more Jeeps than there ever were. And that's because I just bought one, and now my attentional system is like, and I said that that these heuristics overlap. This is like the frequency illusion is a combination between selective attention, so really paying close attention to features on your vehicle in this case, and the confirmation bias, and confirming, yep, there's another one. Yep, see, I knew there were a lot of, there's another one. I knew it. I knew there were a lot of Jeeps now. So it's kind of a combination of the two.
Yeah, so when you brought this up before, even though we didn't give it a name, what jumped out to me was in police work. What happened to me, and not only me, but frequently, is you'd get a call over the radio, and the suspect vehicle it's a red 91 Ford Ranger, and in a violent crime. And now everywhere I look, I see red Ford Rangers. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's like, just like you said, in my head is like, did everybody go and buy a red Ford Ranger today? But this explains it, is that frequency illusion where there aren't any more. I'm just looking for one, and now I see them everywhere.
You're starting to really pay attention to those.
Okay.
It's common. It happens a lot with words. You learn a new word and the meaning of a new word, and then you'll see it in print several times in close proximity to that and think, this must be a new, everybody's starting to learn this word, use this word.
But you're just paying attention to it.
You're just starting to pay more attention to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Frequency illusion.
There's a kind of an example of how this happened in the science community. in Boston, this was at the start of the original COVID outbreak. Doctors started getting appointments from people, appointment requests, and they were coming in. They'll say, like, what do you need to see the doctor for? And they were saying, I have swollen and discolored toes. And it's called Chilblain's symptom. I believe it has Chilblain's symptom, I think is the name of it. I could be pronouncing that wrong because I'm not a medical doctor, but it's a medical condition where your toes swell and they're discolored. So in the Boston area, and I guess it happens more in the winter, they would normally see, like a doctor's office may normally see 1 or 2 cases in the winter season. And now all of a sudden they're getting 15 or 20 people requesting appointments. And it was happening to different doctors in the Boston area. And then there started being reports from different places around the globe that there was an uptick, a fairly large uptick in chilblains symptoms. I probably shouldn't keep pronouncing that because I'm probably saying it wrong. And it will, if somebody knows how to pronounce it, it'll drive them crazy. So I'll stop. but health professionals, so my understanding is they're still not certain why there was this uptick, but because it happened at the same time as the onset of COVID, everybody was really focused on COVID. So it immediately got connected. The symptoms got connected with COVID and said, this is a new COVID symptom. And it became known as COVID toes. So they started saying, oh, they have COVID toes.
I heard of
You've heard COVID toes?
Yes, but I didn't know any of this.
Yeah. So it became clear fairly soon afterwards that the swollen, discolored toes weren't connected to COVID. And part of the reason they know that is because as these cases, more and more cases came in, they would test them for COVID or ask if they'd had COVID symptoms. And those having COVID was very, very low. And I think it was just as low as the general population. So no matter what reason you came in for, your chances of having COVID were about the same as your chances of having COVID if you had COVID toes.
Right.
So, but because COVID was at its peak and it was at the front of mind, doctors were misled into this frequency illusion, thinking, oh, these are happening together. So, and then as things usually are, when something catches on like COVID toes, even if it turns out you find out they aren't connected, the phrase and that thought still remains with the general public because that's hard to let go, especially if you haven't done the research. And then you're thinking, then now we're talking about confirmation bias where you're buying into COVID conspiracies and, oh yeah, they're trying to make us think that it's not connected. And so, yeah, it sticks around for a long time afterwards.
But all of these things you're describing, like what you just said, for conspiracy or whatever, is like, that's just how our brain is wired. Right. I mean, it's just doing its job. It's just, if we're not aware of it, it can kind of, I don't want to say get away from us, but.
Well, if you think about every heuristic we've talked about,
Mm-hmm.
if you apply it to something that, we were applying it to ways that it can kind of bite you, you have to be careful of. But if you apply it to the other 99 things that you do out of 100, you're like, boy, I'm glad that my brain jumped to that assumption or jumped to that conclusion or put that as a stereotype, because that helps me understand and get through my world so much easier. If I would have had to stop and think through all of that, I would have, you can't, you don't have the time and resources to.
I think it was our very first episode that you were, it was our second episode that when you were describing the odd channel and the back channel, and I used the words, but the back channel is fast and frugal, but prone to error.
Mm-hmm.
And so thankfully it's fast and frugal because Sean's wearing a shirt for the podcast and brushed his teeth, all the things all the decisions I made today,
Mm-hmm.
that didn't bog down, that system is running efficiently and the way it's supposed to. But every once in a while, that system can make an error. And so we just need to be aware of the ways sometimes that those errors can occur and watch out for them. So
absolutely.
I want to get to one more.
Sure.
Anchoring and adjustment. Last one I'll hit you up for. So what is that as a heuristic? What does that mean?
Yeah, I love this. The idea behind this. So anchoring and adjusting occurs when we rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered. That's turns out to be the anchored. And then we adjust our judgments around that anchor, but we very rarely adjust them back to where they should be. And that's kind of a convoluted description of it. But I graduated with my graduate degree from the University of Nevada. and so did Casey, my wife. We both graduated from University of Nevada, and Orrin, our youngest, when he was ready to go to college, he wanted to go to the University of Nevada, an undergrad. So he moved out there. We were living in Kansas, where we live now, at the time. So he started school in Nevada, and I was sitting at dinner one night and with Casey, and the phone rang, and I looked at it, and it said University of Nevada on it. I'm like, University of Nevada? Maybe Orrin, there's a problem. He's calling from the university or whatever. So I just answered it and said hello, and the person on the other end said, hello, is this Jonathan Page? And I said, yes, it is. And she said, hi, Jonathan, this is Lacey or whatever. I'm a student at the University of Nevada, and we are raising money to purchase a shuttle bus to help students who are out late at night and need it when it's dangerous to walk back to the dorms and need a ride back to the dorms. I know that your son goes to school here, and we're asking the parents to donate money to help with the, purchase a van. And she said, is this a good time to talk? And I said, actually, this isn't a good time. I'm right in the middle of dinner, in the middle of my meal. Could you call back? And she said, sure, I'll call back tomorrow if that's okay with you. And I said, yeah, that's fine. Call back tomorrow. And I was thinking, got off the hook. Maybe she'll forget. And she said, I also know you're an alumni from here. I was like, yes. So when I got off the phone, Casey's like, who was that? And I said, that was Lacey from University of Nevada. And she was like, what'd she want? I said, she wanted us to donate money for a shuttle bus to transport students back and forth from the university late at night. She's like, she's wanting us to donate money. I said, yeah, why can't the university buy the shuttle bus we pay tuition, we pay dorm fee, we pay all this. Why are they asking us to pay for it? And blah, blah. So I said, she says she's going to call back. If she calls back, I feel like I need to donate something. And she said, yes, you do need to donate something. I said, what do you want to donate? And we talked about it a little bit, and we said, how about $25? I said, yeah, I'll just tell her I'll give $25. I mean, if there's 8,000 undergrads, if every one of their parents give $25, you can buy several shuttles. So we were like, yeah, okay, let's do that. The next night, Lacey called again at dinner time. So I saw it and I answered. I thought $25. And Casey looked at him and said $25. I'm like, okay. So I answered and said hello. So she kind of went through her spiel. And then she said, I was wondering if you would be willing to donate some money. And before I could answer, she said, most parents are donating between $80 and $100. And she said, what would you be willing to give? I was like, oh. And then my mind just immediately went to 80 to 100. If I give 100 or give 80, I mean, I can't, we've already agreed. I just said, I could do $50. She said, okay, 50, I'll put you down for $50. And I said, yeah, put me down for that. And immediately I was like, I just got anchored and adjusted. She just set the anchor and pulled me from where I was wanting to be up towards her anchor. I couldn't believe it. And I got off the phone, and Casey said, what's wrong? Because I came walking back into the room, and I guess I had a disgusted look on my face. She said, what's wrong? And I said, I just got anchored and adjusted. She said, what do you mean? And I said, she just used psychology as a weapon against me. I just donated $50. She said, 50. We agreed on 25. I said, I know, but I got anchored and adjusted. She said, all you had to do is say $25. I'm like, and that's because that's how our brain works. Somebody sets an anchor, and it's hard to move from that anchor. She said people are given between 80 and 100, meaning I should also give between that. So I could say 85, I could say 90. I could have also said 25, and she would have said, yeah, that's great, thank you. But it pulled me from there. It was kind of like a duel between two anchors. Instead of me hitting, at least I didn't hit 80 or 100. If Casey and I hadn't set a price, I probably would have given 100. But I was anchored at the 25, but then her anchor pulled me towards that.
So that's interesting because the anchor that you set, I don't want to say it was arbitrary, but it was just you and Casey, $25. Okay, that's my anchor.
Yeah.
But the other anchor brought maybe, I want to say emotion into it, but this idea that everybody else is giving this much.
Yeah.
So now think about everything that we've talked about with not wanting to be an outlier, and you don't want to, all of the things that just happen in your brain in the instant,
Yep.
In your back channel, drug your anchor north to 50.
Yeah. So you're going to be that guy that's only given 25 when everybody else is getting like, yeah, no, you're right. I hadn't even thought of it I was thinking about anchor and adjust, but you're right. Just wanting to fit in, wanting to do what the group is doing, that kind of mob mentality type thing where everybody's doing that. So I should be doing that too type thing.
Yeah.
That plays on that as well. So that's kind of two heuristics it was hitting.
Yeah. Yeah. But her anchor was heavier than yours. It
Yeah.
drug you.
So if you're selling like for sale by owner, like your car or furniture or whatever, set the anchor first. Don't let somebody else say, like, what will you give me for it? Now if somebody says, what do you want for that car? Well, what would you give me for it? You're letting them set the anchor.
That is so interesting.
And they're going to set it lower, and then you'll have to try to pull it up a little bit.
Pull the anchor up, yeah.
But if you would have set it higher, they would have tried to pull it down. You probably would have ended up getting more out of it than if you let them set it really low.
And I am famous, at least in this household, for not being able to barter. I am the worst at buying and selling anything because and I've never put it in the terms you just did, but I don't set my anchor going into it when I'm selling an item. I've sold a vehicle before, and there are people in this world that I have met that can just talk people down to this. They drag their anchor. You know what I mean? And again, my wife just goes, just figure out how much you're going to sell it for. That's the price. And I always come back in the house like I took way less than I was supposed to. But then
you come in with the same look I came in front of Casey,
yep. I gave $50, but no, I mean, I've sold the vehicle for way less than I wanted to. And then on the flip side, I've gone to buy something from somebody and I don't even try to move their anchor. How much do you want for it? 1,100. Okay, here's 1,100. I don't know.
Exactly.
But there are some people that I've known in this world that are just so good. It just happened to me. I don't know. But we went on a trip to Mexico. We met some really great people at this resort. But one of these guys, Sal, who is an Italian guy from Michigan, he's a really great guy. We had a great time. But my wife and I are at this market buying some clothes for our grandchildren, and the guy just says, "Here's how much it is," and me being me, I'm going to pay that, and I swear at that moment,
is that in pesos or dollars?
Oh, don't even get me started on that because I didn't understand the currency at all. I got so confused. But Sal just happened to be walking up to us at this market to say, "Hey, you guys, hey, whatever." And Sal just looks and goes, "How much?" And the guy tells him, and he's not even buying it. I'm buying it. A guy I just met too, even though we had a really instant connection, he goes, no, go. And he starts talking this guy down he drags his anchor way lower than he wanted to go. And finally the guy goes, okay, give me this much. And it was like half what I was going to pay.
So you give that guy the 20 and then you give Sal the other 20.
I should have given Sal the rest of the money. But and Sal's wife, when I was explaining it, she goes, "Oh, he does that all the time. That's just what he does." And I didn't even think about giving Sal a cut of the profit or the proceeds, but I was willing to pay, $300, whatever. And I ended up, paying $1.80 or $1.90 because of Sal. And I just imagine Sal goes through life just being able to talk, talk people down to pull the anchor right down to where he has his set. It's amazing.
I went into a store with a relative once. It was like Best Buy, like just a appliance store, and just started going and going, trying to buy a TV, and just kept arguing, trying to get him lower and lower. I walked away, and I'm going, I'm never going in the store with this guy again. But he would get stuff for a better price always.
Yeah.
But it was like, I can't do that. I would rather pay full price than argue with people like that. But
it's an amazing skill if someone has it. I do not have it. I don't have it.
Yeah. And that's why I just pay the difference because I'm terrible at it. I would end up, if I started trying to argue with people, they would say, well, actually, this is better than what you think it is. They would probably raise the price and I would end up paying more rather than less. So, yeah.
Yeah. If they saw me really knew that I don't even have an anchor on board, let alone set. I don't even own an anchor.
I'm just out floating.
I'm just floating free in the ocean.
Well, the concept of this we use in Preflex, because you've helped us train before when we were training officers down in California, where we would say, set your anchor for safety, for professionalism,
Mm-hmm.
and set it before you interact with the person, and then just keep in mind you're not going to move my anchor unless you do something dangerous or or break a law or whatever.
Right.
You're not going to move my anchor, because if they start getting hot-headed and arguing and then you move your anchor, then they've won. So don't let them win. And after that, I don't know if I think this was at a different training where an officer said, when he was reporting on if the training was effective or not, he said, yeah, it's changed how I interact with people on what do you call when you pull somebody over for speeding on a
Traffic stop.
traffic stop? Thank you.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are really difficult words, traffic stop. So on a traffic stop, he said, there was a car that was speeding. So I dropped in behind it, and he said it wasn't speeding terribly, but it was speeding. And I thought, I'm just going to give them a warning, tell them to slow down because it can be dangerous. And it was kind of rush hour. And he dropped in behind, turned his lights on, and he said the car almost immediately just hit the brakes really hard and just whipped over onto the right shoulder and stopped really fast, which made him stop really fast too. So immediately he's going, oh, okay, the attitude. And then he said, I just took a breath and said, remember where your anchor is. Your anchor is at a warning. And he said, I got up and went to see them, and happened to be a lady. This isn't a stereotype. I'm just saying this time it happened to be a lady. She rolled down her window and said, I don't know why you're pulling me over. I've got to get my kid. They're holding my kid at daycare and I'm running late, and started yelling. So why were you even pulling me over? And he's like, ma'am, you were speeding. And she just was really started letting him have it. So he just waited till she kind of cooled down. And he said, hey, I understand you got to go get your kid. Let me take care of this real quick and I'll let you go. I need to see your driver's and registration, and I'm going to give you a warning today. And, just went in and told her, and she was still kind of yelling around. He said she was saying some choice words and some cursing at him too.
Mm-hmm.
Handed that to him. He went back, everything turned out. And he said, I didn't sit back there and make her wait longer. I just looked and everything was right. So I just filled out the paperwork fairly quickly and walked back up and said, here you go. And here's your warning. Just try to slow it down because it's dangerous in here. And she told me, I am so sorry for how I was just acting. I don't know how you put up with me. You should have probably given me the ticket. I called you names. I did. I'm really sorry. And he said, hey, I understand when you're under stress, things like that happen. He said she left and he felt really good because he didn't let that lady pull his anchor into, okay, you're getting a ticket. Okay, you want to go downtown type of thing. He's like,
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep my anchor right back here. You can go throw whatever fit you want, and I'm not letting it move. So that's another way you can use anchor and adjust, is to try to set your anchor before interacting with people, to stay grounded in your beliefs of how you want to treat other people, and don't let them drag your anchor into doing things you don't want to do, like spending $50 instead of $25.
Oh, really? Okay. Don't let them pull your anchor. That's that's the real win.
That's the real win.
Because
they recognize it too.
Yes.
When it's over, they're like, crap, I was the jerk in this interaction right now. And if you let your anchor be pulled and you're a jerk back, they feel justified in what you're doing. And I'm not just talking about police and traffic stops. I'm talking about just daily interactions you have with people.
Having a difficult conversation with a coworker or an employee or an employer, a spouse, a loved one. There are plenty of opportunities, I think, throughout the day to practice this.
In
Setting
restaurants,
your anchor.
I see people getting fight in grocery stores, over grocery shopping. There's so many opportunities to let your anchor be pulled, one way or the other.
Yeah.
Just set it and keep it firm.
I love that message. Oh, well, I've kept you a little bit longer than I meant to, but just another great episode with a ton of information. And again, a ton of information that I can use. That's the important part to me, is in my daily life, I can use this information that you're giving me. That's what I appreciate the most.
Good.
So thank you for that.
Yep.
Thank you. And we'll talk soon.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.
brings us to the end of another fascinating discussion here on John Teaches Sean About His Brain. I hope you found today's information as insightful as I did. If you're intrigued by what you heard today and you want to dive deeper, I encourage you to go back and listen to our previous episodes where John has laid all the groundwork for so many of these concepts. We're always looking to continue this journey of understanding our brains together. So if you have any questions about the topics we've covered, or if there's any brain-related mystery you'd like us to try to unravel, we'd love to hear from you. You can connect with us on our social media channels. All the details are in the show notes below. Let us know your thoughts, share your insights, and hey, maybe your question will be featured in a future episode. If you like this episode, tell a friend, a coworker, a family member. And if you love this episode, tell two. Finally, if you're enjoying John Teaches Sean About His Brain, finding these conversations helpful, please don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. With your help, we can continue on this path and work together to make incredible discoveries about the human brain. Thank you.